Bonsoir, mesdames et messieurs. We are doing tonight the ninth Hugo Marston book with Mark Pryor, who's actually British, not French. How's my French?
Very good. There you go.
Thank you. So Mark's most recent book for Hugo, and we'll tell you all about Hugo or Ego in a moment, it's called The Paris Widow. And then next to it, I put a copy of the first one called The Bookseller. And I will add that Mark has very thoughtfully sent us signed book plates that go with our copies of The Paris Widow. So if you wish to have one, you can also get a nice book plate to go with it. We have a large supply. Welcome. It's so good to see you.
Thank you. It's nice to see you. I miss seeing you, and I wish I could be there in person, but this is okay.
Well, you wish you were at the Hotel Valley Ho and we were going out for dinner and all those good things. But anyway, let me say, salut. There we are, our individual glasses. So this is not Mark's publication date, but it is, in fact, our rencontre, so to speak.
Exactly.
Wonderful. So tell you what, for people who might be new, Mark, why don't you tell us about Hugo Marston, who he is, because his job is an interesting one, and it will make a lot more sense if we talk about this book, if we know who and what he is.
Yes, of course. So Hugo is a former FBI profiler, spent many years in the FBI, and then he retired, was hired by the State Department, and his current position for the duration of all the books is as head of security at the US Embassy in Paris. And that's a fabulous job, more so for me than for him, because for two reasons. Number one, nobody knows what that guy really does, so I can have Hugo do anything. And secondly, what it means is that Hugo can get involved in pretty much any incident that involves an American citizen in France, or in Paris, in France. And in fact, I've had him make a couple of jaunts, one to Barcelona and one to London. So it gives, for a character, he has a lot of leeway, and for an author, that's very useful.
So has he had the same ambassador during the course of the books, or has the U.S. ambassador changed?
He's had the same ambassador, and every now and again I think about that and wonder if maybe it's time for a change. But so far, I kind of like the ambassador, actually. So I've kept him.
I like him too. Now, you haven't really leapt ahead in time writing this, right? I mean, the time frame, it always seems of the moment, but in fact, Hugo is not really aging book to book.
Right, and you know, that's something that my editor, I have a good editor at 7th Street, and he was, one of the first things he said to me, you know, when we were talking about this as a series, was to be a little vague on time details, because that sort of lets me keep him current. It's a bit like The Simpsons, right? I mean, they've been around for 30 years, and Bart's still, what, 10 years old or something. So it's a little bit like that, but it's hard to tell how much time has gone by, and that's sort of intentional, so I don't have to turn him into an old man.
Well, I like that, but that also means that the ambassador hasn't been there that long either, since, you know, the books are marching along.
I mean, only 9 books, maybe he had 9 adventures in 1 year.
Well, I mean, in Paris, come on, he could have 9 adventures every month if it came to that. So you've gradually developed a little bit of an ensemble cast. We have the ambassador, but Hugo has by now acquired kind of a romantic interest, although he is a single man in Paris. But actually, he's not a single man. Wasn't he married once? I've lost track.
Yes, actually, I believe he's been married twice.
Twice.
One was, they're playing minor roles, except for the last wife, who was unfortunately killed in a car accident. And so he's been a little leery of romantic interests. And what I've done with his current amour is, her name is Claudia, and I sort of found it interesting to reverse the roles just a little bit. And so now that he's kind of keen on having a girlfriend, she's playing hard to get. And I don't know, he's a very stoic sort of character, so I like messing with him a little bit and making him do the chasing.
Well, I really enjoyed it. That's a very nice feature of this book, is there is a bit of a romantic arc where in some of the other books not. So how do you decide? I mean, Paris is so rich in landmarks and cultural institutions and tourist destinations. How do you decide what to feature in each book?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, sometimes it's by chance. Sometimes it's intentional. I mean, the book before this one was The Book Artist, and I had wanted to set a story because I tried to move it around Paris a little bit, either by place or by theme. And so in The Book Artist, I actually wanted to set it in Montmartre, which is an area of Paris, for those who don't know, is a little bit north. It's a little bit out of the way in terms of the city center, but it's super, super touristy. And the 2 or 3 times I'd been there previously, I hated it, honestly. It was so packed with tourists. It was hot and dusty. There were people selling, crap from tourist stores. But when I went to do research for The Book Artist, I went 2 weeks before Christmas, and it was completely devoid of tourists. It had just rained, and I walked from my hotel. I remember this distinctly, from my hotel to the Sacré-Cœur, which is probably a mile, along cobbled streets that were sort of glistening, and they were reflecting the lights from the restaurants that were open. No tourists, no tourist pap. It felt like I'd gone back in time. Either I'd gone back in time, or I was walking on a movie set, because I didn't come across anybody, and it was just a beautiful time to be there. It was like Montmartre was a village again, and so I got to see a place I didn't really like and fall in love with it again, and then portray it in the book the way I got to see it then, which was as a cozy villagey part of Paris. But for the new one, I was there with my family in Paris with my family. We just happened to go to a museum that was on Parc Monceau, which is where the book is set. And they call it a museum, but nobody ever goes to it because it's not one of the big attractions. It just happened to be close by to where we were. Looked quite interesting. And so we went, and it's a big old house that was built maybe 150, 200 years ago, maintained, taken over by the Germans, restored back as a museum with beautiful furniture, beautiful paintings. And you can just wander around and just feel like you're living back in the early 1900s. And when I was there, I just thought this is the perfect setting for almost an English country manor mystery, except for it's a Paris chateau mystery. And so if you read the book and then you visit that museum, you'll be like, oh yeah, I know where this is. And so that was just a piece of good luck, really.
It's been an interesting year that almost untold numbers of authors have basically written Agatha Christie in some form. And, I chortled when I read your book because, it's not the only one that employs the country house. The new Anne Cleves, the new Val McDermid, your book, last year, Rachel Housel Hall. I'm trying to remember, there's just and not only lots of them, but, varied. The authors are so varied, people you wouldn't necessarily expect. Martin Edwards, for example, there's something about that whole country house setup where you have a big place and a limited number of people who could do the crime because they're contained. And in fact, there's an Archie Goodwin in Nero Wolfe where the murder takes place in a dining room, in a private dinner. And so only the people at dinner or the waiters, could be the suspects, which is just a variation again on the country house murder.
Well, I can guarantee that every single one of those authors you mentioned grew up reading those books. And, I know I was inspired by Agatha Christie and that kind of novel. So, it's funny that they should all flourish at one time. And you have a theory as to why that is? Because we're all locked in?
No, because books were written before this. No book comes to publication, or very rarely, in a very few months. And so I don't know. There must have been something. There's a sort of zeitgeist that seems to permeate where people, sometimes it's led. For example, after the Da Vinci Code published, we had what I call the Da Vinci clones, but they were like religious conspiracy thrillers all over the place. Yeah. And so sometimes a cluster of books is led by one that has done remarkably well and had a lot of market share. And then people think, okay, I can do that. I don't really know exactly why. I think it's partly that because mystery is on an upturn, like all genre fiction. It goes down and then it goes up, and it's on an uptick. And there's been a lot of attention to classics. There's the British Library crime classics, the Library of Congress crime classics, which Poison Pen Press publishes. Otto Penciller's doing American mystery classics. Harper, under Collins, the British imprint, is republishing an enormous amount from its vaults. Not just Christie, because they were Christie's major publisher, but there's like Alistair MacLean has come out, and authors that have been out of print for quite a long time. And so I'm wondering if in part it's this renewed interest in classics and the availability that has prompted people to think about Christie and her structure. Because really, she wrote all the major mystery plots, she wrote.
Yeah, and aren't people recreating Poirot and Sherlock Holmes in new series?
Yes, absolutely. Well, the Holmes thing has gone on for a really long time after the copyright question was resolved. But yes, Sophie Hannah is writing in an authorized Poirot. But there's a lot of people either writing in the 1930s, like, Jacqueline Winspear, Rhys Bowen, Anne Perry now has got a second book set in the 30s. I think maybe part of it is that since 2016, we feel like we're living in the 1930s all over again. My political statement here. And so that was when Christie and the Golden Age were hugely popular. And I think that may have something to do with it, where you're trying to impose order on a completely chaotic landscape.
So that'll take a while then.
I hope not, but it's difficult. It's difficult to tell. I pointed out to somebody the other day that this huge wave of domestic suspense and unreliable narrators, everybody thinks that Gillian Flynn, is the author of that with Gone Girl. And it's true that she kicked off the recent one. But before that, Agatha Christie wrote The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, which is exactly the same thing. And Scott Turow in the late 1980s, I think it was 87, wrote Presumed Innocent. And you have the same question in Presumed Innocent. Who do you trust? Who is the narrator? What really happened? The big twist. And so, it's not original to Gillian. And I think it really was original to Christie. So many of the things that we enjoy, the village mystery, the country house murder, the foreign travel murder, the unreliable narrator, and then They Were None, which is the one that's most commonly being written at the moment. They all came from her. Amazing woman. I mean, just an incredible, fertile mind for plot. Yeah. So it's fun. It's really fun to see what current authors can do with these older forms, how to freshen them up and vary them. And I think they're wonderful. Those of you who are watching, if you've never read all of Agatha Christie, they're not all terrific. There are a few sort of clunkers in there, but honestly, it's a whole refresher course in how to structure crime. So it'd be worth your while to reread them.
Yeah, I second that, absolutely.
So let's go back to the bookseller for a minute. That's your first Hugo Marson. And I loved it because the left bank and the bouquiniste played into that. And that's such a great Paris thing to use book dealers that have those cabins sort of things along the river, the bridge over the river. What drew you to that to start off your series?
Well, I mean, honestly, that was one of those things that was just chance. I mean, you're right, The Bookseller was my first novel that got published, but I had written 3 full books before that went nowhere. I couldn't even get an agent for them. And so, when I was basically in Paris walking along the sidewalk along the bank and saw this guy who looked like Max, the bookseller, the bouquiniste. And I did what I think a lot of mystery authors generally do when they're just wandering around. They think, how can I kill this guy? Why would somebody want to kill this guy? And so I had the idea there and then, and I went to a nearby tobacco, one of those little stores, and I bought a pen and paper, and I just sat and made notes, and that was the creation of The Bookseller. But I mean, honestly, when I wrote it, as I was writing it, I didn't really have necessarily much higher expectations than for the first 3 books. Well, I had high expectations for all of them. I'm kind of an optimist. But it was funny to me that the first 3 just went nowhere. But The Bookseller got instant not fairly instant interest from agents. So I guess the bookish thing I was onto a good thing with that.
You were onto a good thing with that. Now, one of the things I really love about Mark's books is the French history that he incorporates. And I think, is Blood Promise the third book or the fourth?
Third, yeah.
Which one? The third?
Third.
I love Blood Promise because, in fact, it has a cover that matches it, but it moves a bit away from Paris. We're out into a chateau, and there's some wonderful French history that comes into play. So you've obviously done some really good research as part of your writing.
You know, well, this won't surprise you, but doing research for a novel set in Paris is something I can stand. I can bear to do that. You know, I'm sure you know sort of the likes of Jim Ziskin and Terry Shames, and I always kind of joke with them. One has a book set in East Texas and one in rural New York. And I'm like, well, how's the research for you guys? Because I'm having a great time in Paris. So yeah, I mean, I do the research because I'm interested in it. I'm interested in history. And I sort of see one of the recurring themes in my books is that history always comes back to bite you. Like you do something wrong or step out of line, you may get away with it for a while, but eventually some people might call it karma. I think it's just the nature of history. It will come back and reappear one way or another. So that's not really an intentional theme. I'm not clever enough to do that, but I just think that must be something that's lurking in my brain. And I'm very interested in history. I'm interested in, and I think when you put history into a book, it just gives it a little bit more nuance, a little bit more flavor. And that's, just fun to do.
Well, I mean, crimes often have very deep roots. And a couple of yours, I think you're a very good plotter, and some of your plots stretch way back into the past. I mean, whatever happened in the present is explained by, and you have to work your way back to events in the past, particularly too, I think, in Blood Promise.
Yeah, and I think it's true in The French Widow too. I mean, the motivation for the main crime is an event that took place some considerable years before. Get to say things in case I give it away, but I don't think that gives away too much. But yeah, I just think most of the crime, because as a prosecutor, I deal with crime each and every day, and most of the real crime that I see is not the stuff that isn't steeped in history or long-standing motivations is just not very interesting, to be honest. And so I think to make a crime interesting, you have to steep it like a good cup of tea in some history and some acrimony and let it come to the boil.
So give us a little 2-minute précis of the Paris Widow. What can you say about it without spoilers?
So there are two plot lines. One is the murder at Yes, there is death. But there's an attack at the chateau. The victim of that is an American. She's sort of I guess you would say a servant, because this family has descended on what's normally a museum, but it's their family house. And they're coming to celebrate Bastille Day. They come together every year to have a big party. All the big wigs and fancy people are invited. But then this girl a night or two before, this girl is assaulted. And so Hugo, because she's American, he gets to investigate. And part of his investigation takes place during this big party. And so that's one plot line. The other is a little bit more modern, I guess, that Hugo gets involved in a shooting event in a public place. And I kind of wanted to do that because it's topical, because I wanted to sort of write a little bit about the different attitudes towards guns and present both sides, as in, the question becomes to the French public, is Hugo a hero or is he a villain of the piece? I mean, did he do the right thing or did he not do it while there are other people at work behind setting things up? And so it's, I like putting him in situations where he's uncomfortable. He's I said before, he's a very stoic person. He's kind of hard to get to know. And so the way I try to reveal his character a little bit is by putting him in situations that are kind of extreme. And that would be one of them. You know, in another one of the books, I had him find a tape recording of, you mentioned his wife that died. He found a tape record. It was it's been so long since we used these things, you know, a voicemail tape with her voice on it. And it was like a real surprise to him. And I just wanted to prick him a little bit and see how he responds. And so that was my way of doing it in this book, while having a little look, and not in a preachy way at all, but just as a storyline at the gun thing.
Well, it's hard to fashion an entire mystery just along one plot line. So, you know, I think for texture and so forth, it's a great idea to have a second one. One of the other things that is the hallmark of this series, and overcomes a number of problems, is that Hugo is American. So we are in Paris with an American, and therefore Mark is not to be criticized, you know, for getting things wrong as pretending to be French, which is a problem with Americans who have written British mystery are frequently criticized for getting things wrong. And I do think having a viewpoint character that is not French, but American, but working in France, gives you not only a wide range of things he can do, but it also is kind of an umbrella that he can stand under and, you know, not have people attack him because he doesn't know, you know, whatever he's supposed to know as a Frenchman.
Yeah, I think that's true, but you're absolutely right. It is an umbrella for him, but it's also kind of a hurdle, because he'll show up at a crime scene, and already whoever's there, whatever French cop is like, you know, who's the Yank with the cowboy boots? We don't want that guy here. You know, and there are cultural barriers. He speaks the language pretty well, so that's not an issue. But it's another. He's automatically a fish out of water whenever he goes to a new crime scene or meets new people. Unfortunately, I have him working with the same detective as much as I can, because, you know, they get on very well. I think they make an interesting pairing.
Oh, good. You're back. Hi.
I have no idea what happened there.
Nor do I, but your connection must have been severed because we stayed up. That's all right. I did a little pitch for other authors writing French.
Okay, sorry about that, everyone. My apologies.
No, it's not your fault. You know, every once in a while tech does that. So I was mentioning Martin Walker, Cara Black, Jean-Luc Vanderbeck. You know, there are lots of people who write very colorfully about different aspects of France. Like, and you haven't got Hugo entirely in Paris. Let's talk about your Barcelona book for a moment. Why Barcelona? Because I mean, that's one of my favorite cities too. So it was fun to go there.
Well, it's funny because you know, I realized that I could take Hugo pretty much anywhere in Europe, maybe anywhere in the world. And so a few years ago, I was talking to my wife about where to go on vacation. And we had this whole list of places, Italy and maybe Greece and Barcelona, Madrid, wherever it was. And we sort of negotiated back and forth, and then finalized, you know, going to Barcelona. And then we got there with the family, and my mum was there. And my wife, she goes, "Oh, are you happy now?" Like, not in a mean way, but nicely, like, "Oh, you're happy you're here in Barcelona?" I'm like, "What do you mean?" She goes, "This is where you wanted to come." And I was like, "No, this is where you wanted to come." And it turned out to be a fantastic place. I mean, you're right. We stayed in an apartment right in the old town.
Right.
And just walked everywhere, and just was visually and gastronomically, it was super, just super. We've been back once since because my son was invited to play soccer over there. So we had another week in Barcelona watching him play soccer a couple of years ago, which was, you know, for a soccer fan like me and a proud dad, that was an amazing time.
That is an amazing time. Barcelona is sadly one of those European cities that mass tourism has really overrun. And while it's allowed them to finish building La Sagrada Familia, the wonderful and really unusual architecture of Gaudi, I was thinking about that when I was looking at Ken Follett. He's the new #1 bestseller for a prequel to Pillars of the Earth. And I remember his story that his agent and his publisher didn't want him to write it. They couldn't imagine anybody would ever want to read a book about building a medieval cathedral. And so I love to think about that and think about Gaudi and the whole story of La Sagrada. But because of the tourism, enough money came flowing in that what they thought was going to take decades more, they actually were able to basically completed, and now it's a basilica. They've actually had the Pope there to officially,
Yeah.
consecrate it, and so that's a plus. But the downside is you have to have tickets to go anywhere now in Barcelona, and
Exactly. Very hard
it
to get.
takes all the spontaneity out of it when you have to plan. I also think that the internet has allowed people, you used to be able to just show up in places. You used to be able to show up on a cruise ship back in the days when you would actually go on a cruise ship. And then they would present you with a menu of things that you could do when you got to port. And now everything's all booked up before you ever leave. So much of the spontaneity, I think, of travel has been eradicated by the fact that people can now do everything in advance. And for me, it's lost a lot of charm that way because I'm a big fan of serendipity while traveling. It's
Yeah,
the
I
stuff
am
I
too.
didn't expect.
I always recommend to people, like if they're going to go to Paris or Barcelona, any of these big tourist cities, they go in October.
Yeah.
November. You don't go in the summer months. It just I don't know. Maybe you and I were spoiled because we've managed to travel to these places and seen them at their best. And a lot of people don't have options. If you have kids, for example, we're much more limited now when we can travel because of the 3 pesky kids are in school. Although, as you know, we just got back from a 2-week road trip when they were doing school remotely. So maybe I can go to Paris in October. Well, maybe not. But
Even October, we were in Prague in October, and it was worse than when I was there in the summer. I'm honestly thinking January, is an ideal time. The one city that I would like to go back to that was completely ruined for me by being there in June was Venice. You could barely breaststroke your way through the crowds. It was 100 and some degrees and raining. I mean, it was worse than a Chicago summer when I was a child. And we spent all our time on the Vaporetto, cruising around the islands and everything, trying desperately to get some kind of a breeze out on the water. And eventually abandoned all thoughts of economy and checked into the one grand hotel in Venice that actually had air conditioning in the bedrooms. I was like, I'm done, Rob. I just can't do this anymore.
yeah, and I'm
So
the same way now. Crowds, I can't, and I guess best is the other side of the booking thing. Now I can book a ticket and go through the fast lane or whatever, but I just don't have the patience for crowds anymore. And that was before COVID, so I can't imagine what it's going to be like now.
well, it's hard to say. So one other thing I wanted you to talk about a bit. You're a Brit, and you work in Austin, Texas, as a prosecutor. So first thing is, how in the world did you manage to land a job as you work for the government, right? So how did you? Are you a
Yeah,
city or a government prosecutor? I
I'm a
can't.
county prosecutor.
Oh, county. Okay.
Yeah,
So how
yeah.
did you end up in Austin, Texas, as a prosecutor for a government entity when you come from Britain?
Yeah, it's kind of a convoluted. Well, it's basically the backstory is that my mother is an American, and she met my father on a boat. It's kind of an interesting story. His parents bought him a motorcycle for his 21st birthday and a ticket to America. And so he spent that year riding his motorcycle around America. And then on the boat on the way home, he met my mother. And she fell in love with him, and he mildly fell in love with her, but they corresponded for a year or so and then got married in North Carolina. And she moved to England, where my brother and sister and I all grew up. But it didn't occur to me for the longest time to ask my mom, why were you going to Europe? And she's a very adventurous person and always liked to travel. Well, she told me she was going to Switzerland to do some particular education course, and I don't even remember what. And I said, oh, that's interesting, not meaning it because it wasn't. But she said, what was funny was that there were about 18 of us and on this course, and everybody showed up except one person. And, I'm barely maintaining any interest in the story at all at this point. I'm like, oh, who was that? And she said, Lee Harvey Oswald.
Wow.
And I was like,
Wow.
and being the imaginative writer, you know what that means? That means Lee Harvey Oswald could have been my dad.
Wow, that is a surprise. I thought you were going to say something like Anthony Bourdain or whatever, some kind of cooking person.
And I did a little fact checking on it, and it seems like her story is true. he was supposed to have gone on this course and he never showed up. I don't know if he was being trained by Russians or whatever, but anyway. So point is, I have a ton of family in North Carolina. I went over to stay with them about 25 years ago. Kind of fell in love with America, to be honest with you. I love the attitude of this country, the sort of be who you want to be type thing. I was a journalist, ended up going to law school, got a job in Dallas at one of those big, awful litigation firms. And then just really what I wanted to do was be in front of a jury. I wanted to do the Perry Mason thing, or, I've always been interested in crime, obviously. And so it just occurred to me, why not try to be a prosecutor? And luckily I knew somebody who knew somebody at the office here, and that got me in the door for an interview. And I've been trying all kinds of interesting cases ever since.
Well, I found that fascinating. And then if you take that journey and then you think about Mark writing about Hugo in Paris, you seem to have a kind of natural international bent.
Yeah, I mean, the people often ask me, where would you live if you had the chance? And there are so many places. I love to travel. Paris probably would be the answer eventually, but it's just travel. I think travel is in my blood. My parents traveled a lot. They retired they retired sort of in their 50s and spent 3 years in Africa doing the English version of the Peace Corps. So, I think we're naturally, my brother, currently, he's lived in the States for longer than I have. Have I told you about my brother?
No.
This will amuse you. He is, first of all, he's chief of police in Aspen, Colorado. Second of all, he's a very serious white guy by the name of Richard Pryor.
Oh, that must lead to some confusion.
Well, it does, but I've found that when I tell people sort of 35 and younger, they kind of look at me like,
so.
But yeah, we've all been a traveling family, I think, all of us.
Well, how handy that you have a policeman in your life, even though Hugo is security. I'm sure that it's helpful to be able to run things by your brother. Now, you've written 2 books that are not Hugo. I'm trying to remember. One's called The Button Man and one's called Dominic, right?
Hollow Man.
Hollow Man, sorry. Right, the Hollow Man.
Hollow Man and Dominic, correct.
Right, okay, so what's the genesis of those?
Hugo is such a nice guy, such a good guy, always do the right thing. And I wanted to write something a little different. I wanted to see if I could get inside the head of a really bad person and make him somebody you could root for. And so I wrote Hollow Man, and just to remind everybody watching, fiction, I promise you, because the main character he's English, he's a prosecutor in Austin, and he's a psychopath. So
right, what you know.
Right. I do know 2 of those things. But he's also a musician, which I'm not. But I just thought how interesting to have somebody in a position of power, and to write a character who's so very different from Hugo. And, I've had people who are fans of the Hugo series just be like, whoa, no, I can't do this, which is fair enough. Nowadays, when people say, oh, I've read the Hugo books, I'm going to try the other 2, I always kind of give them a big warning. It's very different. They expect something very different.
Right. Well, Hugo, I hope, has many more adventures to go. Are you working on a new one? I know you've been working on a different kind of a book, more of an historical, but what's up with Hugo for the future?
I don't know. I mean, you're right. I've been focusing on that other sort of historical mystery, and writing's been really hard for me these last few months. I don't know if you found that talking to other authors that you've had in, but I've found it very, very difficult. I can edit, I can read. I've been doing a lot more reading than usual, but writing and having that creative spark and then being able to have the energy to put it down on paper it's been very difficult. So it'll come back. It always does. And I'm working from home, so I don't have the commute to think about stuff, which is when I do a lot of my thinking when I'm on the road. And I've got the kids, around all the time.
Right, which probably explains some of your, writers are all over the place. Many have been much more productive, have done projects that they didn't think they would ever get to. Ian Rankin and I had a wonderful visit back in June, I think it was, not an event, but just a chat. And he had done an amazing amount of work. And then others find it too distracting. If you have children at home all the time, it becomes more difficult. You're being a parent, which is a good thing. And, time probably you will always cherish, because you wouldn't have taken it normally.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's any particular template that we can apply. Is taken everybody differently. Patrick and I, we're the ones doing most of these events and so forth. We have found that time is like picked up to triple speed.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because the amount of work that goes into running a virtual program is at least 3 or 4 times more than when we had authors come to the store. You used to be able to set up an event with like two emails. Somebody would write and say, you want to see Mark on such and such a date, and we'd say, yay. We might negotiate the date, but that would be it. And then we'd send like one email off to the publisher to get books here, and that was it. Eventually you'd show up and the books would show up, and we'd do our thing, and fans would come and orders would come, and but now it's an enormous negotiation. Time zones are a huge problem, because everybody's in different time zones. If you have more than one author, you have to negotiate the time zones. The supply side is a nightmare. It takes probably 4 or 5 times more communication and so forth to set things up. And everybody's working from home. So the people you're dealing with are not in their office, where things are set up. So they're working. I mean, I've answered, for example, a lot of spam calls and so forth, which I wouldn't normally do, but I don't know if one of those numbers from like New Jersey is really a publicist who is not coming up as HarperCollins, she's coming up as a number. So it's very different, and the days seem to just kind of get eaten away with all kinds of small stuff. And in the old days we did like one event, but there are days when we're doing like 3, because there's so many and they stack up. So Patrick has one with Lee Child at 6 o'clock as soon as we are done tonight. Wow. We have 2 tomorrow. We have 2 on Saturday. I'm doing an English one with Ann Cleves and Martin Edwards from home early on Friday. Jim Rollins is flying in Monday, and Joanne Fluke is driving over on Tuesday. And then we revert to virtual things again. Wow. And so it's just dizzy, trying to keep up with it.
Yeah, I was supposed to about the time zone thing. I will tell you that much. I've never, because, I think it's a lot of stuff is left over from growing up in England where we don't have time zones. I was getting time zone calculators because the last thing I want to do is not show up on time. And you won't know this, but after one of the events at your store, maybe the last time, I missed my flight because I got confused by time zones. I was getting into the car to go to the airport about the time the plane was taking off. So
that has happened, and we make it harder in Arizona because we don't do daylight time. So for non-daylight time, we're on Mountain Time, and then during daylight, we're on Pacific Time. And so it rotates around. Right now, we are 8 hours from British Standard Time, but in November, we'll be 7 hours from British Standard Time. Right now, we're on the same time. It's just amazing. And we're doing a number of events with Australians. And so that's a whole nother day plus a time variation. Yeah. Or if we go further away in Europe, we've done Reykjavik, we've done Stockholm, Budapest. And so you have to count the time zones going that way.
Horrific. I would be loved. Yeah.
Well, it does. And so many of the emails, frankly, are just to confirm what time it is.
Well, we did that.
Yeah,
absolutely.
It is really a problem. Whereas, if you're here, it's a little better. But in any case, there are lots of good things about a virtual world, and I'm hoping, although I'm really perishing to go back to live events, as I think we all are, because it's wonderful to see fans. I suspect we'll keep some of the virtual things going, it'll be something of a hybrid because then we get to talk to people that we would not really normally see. So
Right.
I think that'll be fun. Now, Patrick is coming my way and he may have a comment or a question or two from people who watch, assuming they didn't leave during the break.
I know. I hope not.
Well, it's the way it is, right?
Hey, Mark. No
Hey, Patrick.
real questions that you haven't actually answered. So there are a few people asking about Hugo, of course. I've had a couple people say, they've already read the book and loved it.
Oh, that's nice.
Other than that, just lots of people enjoying the program, from what I can tell. Yeah.
Thank you for sticking with us during, I hope that I was able to to bridge the gap. So, well, it's wonderful to talk to you, Mark. I miss seeing you, but this is a great way to connect. I will be excited to hear your future writing plans. And you know what? It's okay to take a break. You have turned out books with great regularity in the time that I have known you.
I think I now have 11 novels in 8 years.
Right.
So you're right. Maybe I can take a break just for a little while.
Sure. I think it'd be wonderful, but not for too long. In any case, great to see you. Thank you all for joining us this evening. We appreciate your watching us. If you have time, tune back in at 6. Patrick will be talking to Lee Child and a couple of contributors to an anthology called The Nicotine Chronicles, which sounds amazing. And don't forget, we have copies of the Paris Librarian, the Paris Widow, well, also the Paris Librarian, with book plates signed by Mark. So, good evening. Hello. We hope you're enjoying our programs and podcasts with authors. We'd like to expand them, and your help would be appreciated. Please make a donation at poisonedpenfoundation.org. 100% of the proceeds will go to help connect authors with readers in this difficult time. Thank you.